The Knights of the Round materia, reworked summons, a new enemy skill, improved traversal, sky pirate battles. You guys have been leaving some really cool ideas for what you would love to see in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. And of course, I have my own thoughts and opinions on that as well. So that's what we're going to take a look at in today's video. The stuff we hope to see show up in Remake Part 3. So if any of that sounds cool to you, feel free to click the like button. And if you're new here and you'd like to stick around and help support the channel, you can subscribe. And of course, leave your thoughts in the comments down below on anything that we discussed in today's video. So obviously, if you've kept up with my channel, I absolutely loved Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It is not without its criticisms, of course, although it is my game of the year. There's always stuff that can be improved upon for Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. And considering that's going to be the final game in this trilogy, I'm pretty sure the devs are going to want to go all out and make it the best that they can possibly make it. And to go along with that, we all kind of have our own thoughts and opinions and suggestions on what we would love to see in Remake Part 3 be integrated. And we're going to start first with traversal. Now, I've brought this up in past videos, but the traversal mechanic in Rebirth, while it's not bad, it doesn't feel as great as I think it could. Running around as Cloud feels fine, but when you do the contextual jumping and climbing, it feels a little awkward. It feels kind of stiff, and that's something that I would really love for them to iron out and make it feel so much smoother. And I think one of the ways you can do that is by giving Cloud a jump button. I don't know where exactly you would map that button because almost every button on the DualSense controller is occupied. Perhaps you could map a jump to the X button, which would then make using the command menu outside of battle a little confusing, but I'm sure they could find a way to implement a jump button. Just give us more control and freedom over how we control our party outside of battle, just to make things a little smoother. You know, I look back constantly at games like Horizon Forbidden West and Ghost of Tsushima, and I bring those games up a lot because Naoki Hamaguchi, who is the director of Rebirth and is directing Remake Part 3, has stated on multiple occasions that both of those games are huge influences on Rebirth and this entire trilogy. And I look at those games and I look at how Aloy controls, I look at how Jin controls, and they control like butter. It's like a dream running around exploring with them and climbing on things. It feels really effortless. I think some people might say it's maybe a little too simplified because it's one of those situations where, kind of like in Rebirth, if you're climbing something, you just hold the direction you need to go, and that's where the character goes. But overall feel in those games feels incredible. I love running around and exploring with Aloy, climbing on things, jumping off of things, and being able to hover with my glider, down to the way, you know, a horse controls in Ghost of Tsushima. It feels really, really good. And considering this was the team's first chance at doing it, a truly like mostly open world game for this franchise in particular, obviously things aren't going to feel amazing right out the gate, but I'm pretty sure by the time we get to 7 Remake Part 3, that is stuff they've probably figured out by now and will iron out to ensure that traversal feels so much better. And other things that could help traversal feel better is just the fact that we're going to get the high wind in most definitely the gold chocobo. And the gold chocobo is going to be able to do everything. I imagine it would control really well too, but the high wind again would be able to get us to areas that we normally wouldn't be able to access on foot. Maybe we could just jump straight off of the high wind or climb down that ladder to get to specific sections, use the chocobo to climb. So I think they're going to find different ways to alleviate how traversal feels and to keep it feeling fresh and really offer the player different avenues to how they want to approach exploring an area or even climbing something. Now, speaking of a gold chocobo, in the original Final Fantasy VII, you needed the gold chocobo to get you to the Knights of the Round materia, the most powerful summon in all of Final Fantasy VII. Now, obviously, Knights of the Round will make an appearance in this game. They have to. And the developers have been pretty faithful when it comes to recreating what, you know, a lot of fans remember from the original game, whether it's combat stuff, materia, story stuff. These guys are fans themselves, and they know what made those games so special. So obviously, you gotta have the Knights of the Round. But how do you get to the Knights of the Round? Well, this brings into question another thing: dungeons. Proper, real dungeons that we didn't really technically get in Rebirth. We got different areas to explore and different enemies to fight within those areas, but we didn't really get like an actual proper entrance to a dungeon where we're fighting through these dank caves to get to the end for a reward. And if you've been keeping up with my past videos, I'm kind of under the impression that we won't have access to Chadley for probably most of Remake Part 3. Either he's gonna die or something's gonna happen with him and Hojo and he's gonna be captured. I also think they're probably going to find a way to make everyone who hates Chadley and constantly is annoyed by him, maybe feel kind of bad by the end of 7 Remake for what they're going to do to Chadley. I think he's going to die. I straight up think Chadley's going to die. Hojo's going to do something sick and twisted and murder the young boy. So we're going to lose him. So naturally, if you don't have Chadley, who is there to kind of hold your hand and show you where everything is at and make materia for you, you're going to have to find other avenues to get your hands on that stuff, which would introduce the idea of actual dungeons, materia caves, where you're going into these caves and fighting for your life to find specific materia, which brings me to, again, the Knights of the Round. And you think about dungeons in games, and like there's obviously like entry-level dungeons, halfway point dungeons, and then there's like the final dungeon of a video game, the end-all be-all dungeon that you gotta go through to get the best equipment, the best spells, the best summon. And that, to me, is Knights of the Round. So the island that the Knights of the Round are on in the original FF7, that to me should be Remake Part 3's final ultimate dungeon. You gotta probably work your butt off to get a gold chocobo, maybe do some chocobo breeding to get you to that island. But once you're there, you're not just gonna grab the Knights of the Round. Are you silly? That'd be way too easy. You can't just hand over the most powerful summon materia to the player once they get to that island. The devs are probably gonna make us work for it. So having the Knights of the Round island be the final dungeon where you're fighting your way through this dungeon with some really tough enemies that are, maybe not brutal or legendary difficulty, but pretty close to it. These should be big knockdown, drag out fights, but you're getting rewarded as you progress further and further until you get to the end of that dungeon, and there's that Knights of the Round materia. Now, something else they could also do is they could take inspiration from the New Threat mod. I believe it's the New Threat mod that introduced this, but they took the Knights of the Round island and added, I believe, Omega and Shinryu to that island. And these are two beings that are locked in eternal battle with one another, and right in between them is that Knights of the Round materia. So in that version of the game, you had to fight both Shinryu and Omega at the same time in order to get your reward of the Knights of the Round. So I think the devs could do something very similar in Remake Part 3, but really make the player fight for it and earn it. So that way when you do get it and you do use it, it's like, all right, I earned this incredibly cool summon, and now I get to kick some butt with it. So Knights of the Round being the final dungeon in the area, them even introducing proper dungeons and materia caves, I think is something that will happen and probably should happen. Again, this is a big globe-trotting adventure. It really should feel fun, exciting, and organic. And I think as players, we want to feel that sense of, yeah, I totally earned this, and now I get to do and use something really cool. Now, speaking of summons, this is something else that's been brought up on the channel, and that's simplifying the summons. I've seen quite a few people say they're not crazy about how the summons work in the Remake trilogy, where you bring them onto the battlefield and they fight alongside you until they leave and unleash their ultimate attack. I personally don't really have an issue with that. I think it's really cool, honestly, when you're in the heat of battle and you're fighting and you bring out a summon to help, fight alongside you, like you're kicking butt, and then you've got Bahamut in the corner unleashing a big attack, assisting you, and then finally they're like, okay, I gotta peace out, my planet needs me, and then they hit their ultimate attack and then boom, they're gone. I think that's super cool. But I know there are a lot of people that are like, it doesn't really feel worth it to use a summon because you are using your own ATB to issue them commands, unless you just let them fight on their own on the field. So the idea of simplifying summons, I don't know if they would do that, where they just show up, hit their ultimate attack, and then they're out. But I think if they were to do that, it would leave a really cool opportunity to have some really awesome, high quality, big budget cinematics at play. I think back to like Crisis Core, where in that game, when you used a summon, you had a cutscene literally play when Bahamut would show up, for example, and you'd have this beautiful CG render play, and Bahamut would unleash its attack, and then it'd peace out. So you could take inspiration from a game like Crisis Core and rework your summons so that way they're not on the field with you all the time, but they're just there, they show up, they do a big attack that's beautiful, and then they peace out. And that could also kind of go hand in hand with Knights of the Round. It's a big group of knights that are all showing up. Not all of them are going to be on the field at once. So it's either a situation where you might have 2 or 3 show up on the field at a time to assist you, and then they peace out, and then the next set of knights come in and they do their thing, and then they peace out, which leads to the ultimate attack. Or again, you could just have that big, massive, beautiful CGI render hit, and then there's your ultimate attack. There's a lot that they could do with that. But either way, I'm fine either way. Again, I don't have an issue with the way summons work now, but the idea of maybe going back to how they traditionally used to work could work as well. Speaking of reworking materia, this brings us to the enemy skill materia, and this is a comment I've gotten quite a bit on my videos of people not really too excited with the way that enemy skill currently works in the Remake trilogy. And the way that it works is you get the materia from Chadley, and then you have to do specific VR missions in Chadley's simulator to learn specific enemy skill abilities. But again, if we're going with the notion that Chadley won't be there to give us this materia or the abilities, then that would require us to use enemy skill like we did in the original game. You get the enemy skill, you equip it, and then you have to fight the enemy that has that skill you want, and then the enemy has to use the skill. And in that way, the player then learns what that enemy skill is. So like say you want White Wind, which I believe was renamed in this trilogy. I can't remember the name. Is it Soothing Breeze or something like that? If you want that ability, you have to track down the enemy that has it, you have to fight it, and they have to use it for you to learn it. And I think that could be, you know, really cool for the end game stuff. If you're going around, maybe you're doing some grinding and you're trying to prepare for that Knights of the Round island, you're going to fight Shinryu and Omega, and you need specific abilities. That would require the player to do a little bit of footwork, which some people may not like, to track down specific enemies in specific regions that have these specific abilities that you need. Could be pretty cool. Next up, we have the idea of sky pirate battles. Now, we've talked about getting into the high wind, doing air combat against Shinra airships. Maybe it's either like a turn-based kind of thing, maybe it's a real-time action dogfight kind of thing where we're flipping and dipping in the high wind, shooting missiles and rockets, or maybe it turns into the actual combat system of 7 Remake where we've got the high wind there in real time, we're filling up ATB, using abilities, whatnot. But one of my viewers by the name of A Cloud Without Air had a really cool idea of maybe doing it kind of like Final Fantasy 15, where there's moments in the game where you're running around minding your own business and then a Magitech ship shows up, a bunch of soldiers drop out of the ship, and now you're fighting them in real time. I think you could apply that to Rebirth because again, we're on the run from Shinra. They're probably going to have airships scouting every region they can to find us, so naturally we're going to get into combat in that way. But they also bring up the idea of like actually jumping onto these ships with our characters and doing actual real-time combat. Kind of like the section in Final Fantasy 15 where Noctis is basically warp striking from ship to ship, doing combat in real time. And potentially you could have something like that in 7 Remake where you're on the high wind, maybe you have the option to do a dogfight, or if you're close enough, you can board the enemy ship and just hop off, and Cloud and crew are doing battle on one of these Shinra ships, and then they can jump to the next one and do some like really cool stuff. So I wanted to single out that viewer in particular because I thought your idea was super cool, and it brings me back to Final Fantasy 15, and that was a really cool action set piece that that game had. So the idea of being able to battle on a Shinra ship and jump to another ship would be insane, and you'd need the power of the PlayStation 5 Pro to do it. You wouldn't obviously need to, but it would be pretty sick. And I do want to alleviate some concerns. I know I saw some people in the comments saying that they're afraid that Remake Part 3 will be a Pro exclusive. That's not going to happen. So the way that the Pro stuff works is a game comes out on PS5 and it's for the PS5. Base PS5 works just fine on the PS5. But when it comes to the Pro, the developers can choose to put out a patch that makes it enhanced specifically for the Pro. So it'll look better, run better, higher frame rates, resolutions, whatnot, but it still works on a base PS5. That's what will most likely happen with Remake Part 3. So if you don't have a Pro, you don't got to worry about it. The game will work just fine on base PS5, not going to be an issue. The next thing, very controversial, minigames. Rebirth obviously had a ton of minigames. You could argue too many minigames. I don't think there was really a ton of minigames that I disliked. There were some that I didn't like for sure. Gears and Gambits in particular. Once I did that once, I'm like, I'm good. I don't need to do it ever again. 3D Brawler, I'm either really slow on my reaction time or I'm just really bad at reading cues, but that was really frustrating to deal with. But overall, my whole mentality on minigames in Rebirth was I did everything once, and if I didn't feel the need to do it again, I didn't. And the game in particular, Rebirth, I think really only forces you to do mini games, I think 4 times throughout the entire story. And that's the Queen's Blood tutorial, so you know how to play Queen's Blood. There is the Rufus Parade, where you have to do the QTEs for the parade dance. There's the 3D Brawler once you get to the Gold Saucer and you have to fight Dio to get in. And then I believe the last one are the Chocobo races in the Dust Bowl when you have to race for your freedom, essentially. I don't remember if the game requires you to do any more mini games outside of that in the story that are mandatory. I think those are the only ones. So for me, it was really a situation where if I didn't want to do a mini game again, I just didn't. And that's the beauty of the game, is if you don't want to do the mini games because you don't like them, you don't have to. You can skip them. But On the flip side of that, a lot of these mini games have really great rewards, whether they're materia, items, or even just really great story stuff. Gears and Gambits in particular. Not a fan of that mini game, but the story stuff you get, learning more about Avalanche's beginnings, what happened to Wedge at the end of 7 Remake, that's pretty vital stuff. So I completely understand the FOMO aspect of, yeah, I don't have to do the mini games, but I feel like I'm really missing out on some great stuff if I don't do them. I completely get that. So I think, just based on what we know story-wise, Part 3 is going to be insane. It might be a game where they hit the ground running and they never let up because there's going to be so much that happens. So I think they'll pull back on the mini games, and it'll be a situation where it'll be more, quality over quantity, so to speak. Next, underwater exploration, which I am terrified of. Big blue oceans scare the crap out of me, not knowing what's underneath my feet, not knowing if there's a massive shark or a blue whale near me that could demolish me in one bite. Genuinely terrifies me. Almost as much as fighting a gigantic snake did in Rebirth. But it's gotta happen. We're gonna have to get through that in a submarine or even just swimming as our characters. There's gonna be areas in this game where we're probably not locked off, where we can actually go into the ocean and we don't need the tiny Bronco to, transport us around. We're gonna actually potentially go in the water with our characters and experiment with underwater combat, which could be pretty cool. And again, I look at a game like Horizon Forbidden West, which is gorgeous. I bring this game up a lot because I love it. I think it's fantastic. It's beautiful. I love the story. I love the world building. I love the regions. They're so beautiful and well designed and super fun to explore. And again, if you're someone who hasn't played Horizon Forbidden West in particular, but you have played Rebirth, the moment you sit down and you start playing Forbidden West, you're going to go, oh, I totally see where the Rebirth inspiration came from now. Hamaguchi, I get you, it all makes sense. And I think that, again, is a game you should look at when it comes to what Remake Part 3's underwater type stuff and exploration could potentially be. In Horizon, as Aloy, you can just jump right into the ocean, you can swim around. There are enemies underneath the water, but your best bet is to hide from them. But just the way it's designed, just the way that it looks, it's beautiful, but also very scary and unsettling how deep that ocean goes. And sometimes you're swimming around and you see a figure in the distance that looks ominous, and it's a robot creature that wants to eat you. I imagine that's what it'll be like in Remake Part 3. I want the ability to jump into the ocean and swim around with Cloud and the party and actually do underwater combat, not just relying on a submarine to get us around. Now, obviously, we will have to use a sub for specific areas, but imagine you're just swimming, minding your own business. You've got the underwater materia, so you don't have to worry about breathing, and you see that shadowy figure in the distance, and what is it? It is the Emerald Weapon. It's making a beeline towards you. What are you going to do? So that could be super, super exciting. Maybe you decide to fight it. Maybe you decide to hide. But again, I think a really great game to look at is Horizon Forbidden West to kind of give players an idea of what Hamaguchi and the team probably want to do with underwater stuff, exploration, traversal, expanding new areas. It's a beautiful game. I absolutely love it. I always highly recommend it. And again, it gives you kind of good insight on what, the team is probably thinking. And the last thing, Advent Children. The developers have brought up in the past that the remake trilogy will link up to Advent Children. What does link up mean? I have no idea. They themselves have never explained what link up means. It could mean that we do end up experiencing Advent Children. We could potentially see aspects of Advent Children in 7 Remake Part 3's story. We could potentially play sections of Advent Children, which I think would be super sick. Maybe we think we beat Sephiroth once and for all, but he pulls an Advent Children and finds a way to bring himself back, and that leads into, maybe the final conclusion of that game. Maybe we think we've beaten Sephiroth and we've beaten Genova, that's the end of the game, and then it flash forwards a year or so, and boom, Sephiroth is back, Advent Children's in play, or maybe it even ends up as DLC. We don't really know. I think what could give us some cool insight on that is a game like Ever Crisis. Eventually, and this is going to take a while, they will get to Advent Children in that game. So to see how they gamify a movie like Advent Children, what battles they include, how exploration works in that world, I think would give us some insight on what Advent Children in game form in the 7 Remake trilogy could be like. So I'd keep an eye out on Ever Crisis, and hopefully sometime soon they will eventually get to something like Advent Children and we can kind of see how that plays out. So with that being said, that is the video. Let me know in the comments down below, what do you guys think of these suggestions so far? You guys always have some really great ideas that kind of go hand in hand with what I'm thinking. I think that's kind of like the group think aspect of being a Final Fantasy fan, but there's obviously a lot of cool stuff that could go down in Remake Part 3. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below on what we discussed in today's video. I will see you guys in the next one. Please take care of yourself. Drink some water, eat some food, be good to yourself, and I will see you guys in the next video. And as always, please remember to always be excellent to one another.